Imagine being in the middle of a battlefield, ready to face your adversaries while an endless number of arrows descend from the sky, accompanied by lead balls that crush both the soldiers and their horses. This is what our video today is about. We will explore the Plumbata of the Roman army. Our story does not focus on the period of the First Roman Empire, but on the late Imperial Roman army to fully understand it. It is necessary to examine the evolution of the Roman army. During the Republic and the High Empire, the Roman army was characterized by large infantry confrontations, where battles consisted of combats between legionaries and enemy soldiers. Although the cavalry had a significant role, the heart of the combat resided in the infantry. This was also reflected in the equipment of the legionary. The shields that went from being elliptical to rectangular, the sword, the gladius of approximately 60 centimeters in length, designed to stab the opponent, mainly with the tip creating a wall of shields from which numerous blades emerged to pierce the enemy. In addition, there was the pilum, the classic javelin of the Roman legionary that was thrown when the adversary was about 10 to 15 meters away. This is the equipment of an army that was accustomed to frontal infantry clashes. In large, decisive battles that often determined the fate of the wars, however, during the period of the late Empire, especially from the 6th century after Christ, the strategy of the Roman army underwent a significant change. The extensive borders that needed to be guarded led to an evolution in the conduct of the Roman army. Although large infantry confrontations still existed, the reality was that the large units, especially of heavy cavalry, were located in border cities at strategic points. When barbarian tribes or enemies crossed the borders of the empire, these cavalry units mobilized quickly to intercept the adversary. Thus, the combats became mainly confrontations of light or heavy cavalry with rapid interventions and battles that developed at greater distances. This change in the nature of combat led to an adaptation of the equipment to adjust to the new tactics and concepts of battle. For example, the sword lengthens considerably, reaching about 70 to 80 centimeters, and is known as the spatha. The shields, mostly round, are designed in this way to adapt to the cavalry, since a rectangular the shield would be uncomfortable for mounted soldiers. This design is also reflected in the helmets. In the context of this evolution of the Roman army, during the late Imperial period, the use of the Plumbata emerges. Now we will explore the details of these Plumbata and what made them so lethal. Let us start from the fact of how a Plumbata is made. The Plumbata is described mainly by 3 ancient sources, although in reality, we have about 20 references about this projectile. This is a Plumbata mediata, the most common type basically. It is an arrow that is clearly distinguished by having a metal tip, which is regularly perforated or pierced. This tip is long and protruding, and from the tip to the central part it measures about 9 centimeters. Then the arrow continues in a regular way, and in its tail it presents a component known as fletching, which is a reconstruction of the pin used to stabilize its trajectory. At the final part, we find an extension that acts as a handle. In total, the Plumbata measures between 30 and 45 centimeters. The main characteristic of the Plumbata is that in the middle of the projectile, it has a lead weight that gives it greater mass and stability. This weight is what turns the Plumbata into an effective and lethal dart. This is the structure of a Plumbata, a dart with a lead core that provides the necessary weight to give it effectiveness. In addition, we have a very suggestive representation of this Plumbata, a drawing made by an anonymous author in the De Rebus Bellicis, the only known one from antiquity that illustrates what this Plumbata was like. This drawing, made by hand by an expert in the ancient military field, was transmitted throughout the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. Now, where was this Plumbata or large arrow stored? According to the ancient authors, who were manuals of military tactics, the main solution was to fix 5 Plumbata on the back of the shield, ready to be taken and thrown, alternately a leather. The case was also used where the Plumbata were placed, allowing them to be extracted and used when necessary. Then how were these large darts thrown? Experimental archaeology has provided a clear vision of the process. According to the reconstructions, the Plumbata were held by the extension at the tail. The dart was held. From the rear part, the arm moved vertically, and from a low position upwards, it was released and thrown. In this way, the enemy was impacted by a rain of arrows and darts that, due to their lead weight, provided a strong impact and maintained a stable trajectory. Throwing a plumbata offered two main advantages. First, experimental archaeology has shown that when thrown correctly, a plumbata could reach up to 80 meters, allowing it to hit enemies in infantry or cavalry at that distance. So this was a significant advantage. The plumbata allowed striking the enemy when they were still at a considerable distance. Unlike the javelin that required being about 15 or 20 meters away to be effective, the plumbata could impact from afar, and when thrown correctly, it fell from top to bottom, overcoming the shields and causing direct damage to the enemy either in the head, the body, or even to the horses, which made it a very effective tool to weaken and disorganize the enemy. Lines before hand-to-hand combat. In addition, the ancient sources mention another type of plumbata known as Tribolata plumbata. However, unfortunately, we do not have detailed descriptions or images of this type of plumbata. Since the ancient sources do not provide specific information about it, it is probable that based on the name, Tribolata, the Tribolata plumbata, had a different structure from the common plumbata in addition to the arrow tip and the lead protrusion in the center. It is possible that it had two additional protrusions. This would imply that in addition to causing damage upon impact, the Tribolata also functioned as a kind of trap when it fell to the ground. In this context, the Tribolata plumbata not only hit the adversary, but when it fell, it became a dangerous obstacle for both foot soldiers and horses, creating a trap on the terrain. This suggests that the Tribolata had a significant defensive function by dispersing and being scattered on the ground. It hindered the advance of the enemy, which turned it into an effective tactical tool to obstruct and protect against enemy forces. These are the two main categories of plumbata, the plumbata mediata and the plumbata. In Tribolata, in addition to these, another interesting aspect has been investigated. The ancient sources also, I refer to the plumbata as Martio Barbuli, which translates as marbles of Mars. The question arises why it is given this name, and there are several theories about it. The main scholar in this field, Eliot, suggests two possible explanations. The first theory is that when thrown, the plumbata could have created a kind of rain of darts that looked like a divine rain, which would justify the reference to Mars, the god of war. The second theory suggests that the tips of the plumbata could have been slightly inclined, which made their extraction from wounds difficult, thus adding an additional characteristic to their lethality. It is important to highlight that these theories are speculative, and there is no definitive certainty about why they were given the name Martio Barbuli with this. We have covered the structure, the use, and the throwing of the plumbata regarding its use on the battlefield. We know with certainty that the plumbata was used by the infantry, both light and heavy, from the 1st century after Christ during the period of the late Empire. The ancient sources specifically mention two legions originating from the Illyricum region that stood out for their training in the use of the plumbata. These legions, composed of approximately 6,000 soldiers, each specialized in the use of the plumbata, with great success, inflicting considerable damage on the enemy. According to Vegetius, these legions were so effective that instead of needing additional archers, their legionaries could perform the role of archers. Through the use of the plumbata before hand-to-hand combat, the effectiveness of these legions was such that the emperors Diocletian and Maximian preferred them and used them in key moments of their military campaigns. These legions were also renamed with honorary names Jovians and Herculeans in reference to divinities, which underlines their prestige and the importance given to them in the Roman army. The strategist confirms that the plumbata was especially effective against troops in arid or wooded areas where its use was very useful to disturb the enemy. This versatility allowed its employment both against infantry and against light or heavy cavalry, making it a weapon adaptable to various units of the Roman army. In addition, the plumbata could also be used in defense during a siege. According to ancient sources, thrown from elevated positions, the combination of the force of gravity and the weight of the projectile made the plumbata very dangerous for the besiegers, thus increasing their effectiveness in the protection of fortifications. It has also been suggested, although without concrete evidence, that the plumbata could have been used during naval battles by throwing it from one ship to another. However, there are no specific descriptions in ancient sources that confirm its use in these situations. So this remains in the realm of theory. To conclude our explanation, there is a small debate in the field of numismatics. Some scholars and numismatists have identified representations of the Plumbata in coins from the late Imperial period, for example in an aureus of the Emperor Maximian. Some experts believe that the emperor can be seen holding a Plumbata. Another case is a bronze of Constantine that could also represent a Plumbata in its details in the coins of the late Imperial period, such as the aureus of Constantine and the aureus of Diocletian. Some scholars believe that the representations you could show Plumbata, especially considering Diocletian's appreciation for the legions that used this weapon. These coins were important for imperial propaganda, and their possible inclusion of Plumbata suggests the relevance and recognition of this weapon at the time. However, there is a debate in the field of numismatics. Sylvan SUL firmly maintains that the images on the coins represent Plumbata, arguing that the weapons presented in these coins were recognized and popular among the citizens, indicating the importance of the Plumbata. Nevertheless, other numismatists have raised objections, pointing out that the Plumbata on the coins do not seem to be placed in the correct location at the final extension of the dart, but closer to the tip, which suggests that they might not be Plumbata. As a response to this objection, it is argued that the limited space on the coins may have led to a stylized representation rather than detailed precision. Therefore, although the representation of Plumbata on the coins might not be exact, it is still possible that a Plumbata is being represented, considering the symbolic function and the simplification of images. In numismatic art, the detractors of the theory that holds that the coins represent Plumbata argue that given the relatively small size of the Plumbata, which range between 30 and 45 centimeters, it is not plausible that representations of the shields held by the emperors are shown according to this perspective. The images in question most probably represent javelins rather than Plumbata, since javelins are observed in the right hand and appear in the left hand of the figures on the coins. From a purely numismatic point of view, the debate about the presence of Plumbata in the imperial coins continues. Despite this discussion, it is clear that the Plumbata was used effectively during several eras of the Roman Empire until the beginning of the 6th century after Christ. However, from that moment, it seems to have disappeared from the legionary equipment, since no more archaeological finds are found that indicate its later use. Therefore, although the Plumbata was a powerful and relevant weapon, it seems that it ceased to be part of the Roman arsenal over time. So we hope we have told you the story of the Plumbata well, a weapon that, although not very well known, was really lethal. As always, we invite you to subscribe to our channel. Thank you for following us, and see you in the next video.